Hello and welcome to the Vailrun Tapes. Every story here is true. It happened to a real person, and they wrote it down or said it out loud, so the rest of us would know. Tonight, I'll share a few of them with you. A lot of you come back here every night, and that means a lot to me. These stories stay with people. That's just what they do. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read all of them. And if you like these stories, a quick like and subscribe really help. Now get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. For a long time, he had a way of talking to me that made me feel like I should be grateful he was even there. He didn't say it like a normal person who was worried about the relationship or afraid of losing me. He said it like a warning, like he was the only thing standing between me and a world full of danger. He would look at me and tell me, straight-faced, that no other man would ever truly love me. According to him, if I left, I'd only end up with someone who would use me, hit me, cheat on me, and throw me away. It wasn't advice. It was a threat dressed up as concern, and the worst part is that hearing it over and over starts to sink in, even when deep down you know it's wrong. It starts to feel like maybe he knows something you don't. Maybe he's right. Maybe you really aren't worth much. That's how it begins to work on you slowly. Like a poison you don't notice until you realize you can't remember the last time you felt confident about anything. The longer we were together, the more he acted like my happiness was a burden he didn't want to carry. He never wanted to do anything I wanted to do, and it wasn't even the usual compromise that happens in relationships. It wasn't like we took turns choosing restaurants or movies. It was always his way or nothing. If I suggested going somewhere, even something simple, he would react like I was asking him to climb a mountain in the rain. He would sigh loudly, drag his feet, complain about the traffic, the cost, the time, the crowd, or just the fact that it wasn't his idea. He made it so unpleasant that I started to question my own wants. I'd find myself thinking, is this worth the argument? Is this worth the mood he'll be in all day? Eventually, I stopped at suggesting things because it was easier to do nothing than to watch him turn my small excitement into something I felt guilty for having. When we did go out, if it was anywhere I chose, he made sure I knew he didn't want to be there. He would sit with that tight, irritated energy, like he was doing charity work instead of spending time with someone he claimed to love. If I tried to lighten the mood, he'd roll his eyes or respond with one-word answers. If I looked happy, he'd find a way to bring me down. It was like he couldn't stand the idea that I might enjoy something without his permission. And then later, if I got quiet, he would accuse me of being ungrateful or ruining the day, as if he hadn't spent hours making sure I felt uncomfortable. But the worst part wasn't even the controlling way he acted about plans. The worst part was how he constantly assumed I was cheating. Not sometimes, not when something actually looked suspicious, but always like it was his default belief. He lived in this imaginary world where I was sneaking around behind his back every time I wasn't directly in front of him. It didn't matter what I said, what I did, or how much of my life I gave up to try to make him feel secure. If he decided I was lying, that was the end of it. I could be standing there with the truth in my hands, and he would still twist it until it turned into something ugly. I remember one moment so clearly because it was so ridiculous, and yet it caused so much stress. I was getting an oil change. That's it, a normal thing adults do. It took longer than expected, like oil changes sometimes do, and I was sitting there waiting, killing time, trying to be patient. He started blowing up my phone, and at first I thought maybe something happened. Maybe he needed something. But the messages came in fast, angry, accusatory. He was convinced I was having sex with one of the texts, not just annoyed, not just suspicious, fully convinced. Like it was the most logical explanation in the world that I would decide to cheat on him in the middle of a random car service appointment. I tried to explain what was happening, tried to send updates, tried to keep my tone calm because I knew how he reacted when I sounded frustrated. But nothing worked. The more I explained, the more he acted like I was covering something up. He demanded details that didn't even make sense. He wanted to know exactly where I was sitting, who was talking to me, what they looked like, why it was taking so long. He made me feel like I was on trial for something I didn't do, and I remember sitting there thinking, this is insane. This is actually insane. And yet my heart was racing, my stomach was tight, and I was worried about what mood he'd be in when I got home, like I was the one who did something wrong. That's what it was like all the time. I was constantly trying to manage his emotions, constantly trying to predict his reactions, constantly trying to keep the peace. And when you live that way long enough, you start to shrink. You start to make your world smaller so there are fewer chances for conflict. You stop answering calls in public because you don't want him to accuse you of being too friendly with someone. You stop taking extra time at the store because you don't want questions. You stop laughing too loudly around other people because you don't want him to decide you're flirting. You become careful about things that should never require caution. And then there was the way he treated me when I needed him most, when any decent partner would have shown up without being asked. There was a time I was really sick enough that I ended up in the hospital. I was scared, weak, exhausted, and I needed support. I needed someone to sit with me, hold my hand, reassure me, help me feel safe. Instead, he left me there alone so he could go home and play video games. It was so casual too, like he wasn't abandoning someone he loved in a moment of real vulnerability. He acted like it wasn't a big deal, like the hospital was some kind of waiting room and I didn't matter enough for him to stay. Things got worse. I ended up needing surgery. After surgery, I was incredibly weak, the kind of weak where even walking to the bathroom feels like a marathon. Anyone who has been through something like that knows how scary it is to feel your body not cooperating, to feel like you're trying so hard just to get through basic tasks. I was nauseous, tired, in pain, and emotionally drained. Recovery is already hard, but it's even harder when the person who promised to care about you treats your suffering like an inconvenience. A few days after surgery, I was at home in bed and feeling so sick I could barely think straight. The nausea was relentless. And it wasn't the kind where you can sip water and wait it out. It felt serious. I needed urgent care. I told him I needed to go, and he had the day off. A partner who cared would have been ready to help instantly. Instead, he refused to take me. He didn't say, "I'm sorry, I can't right now." He didn't suggest calling someone else or ordering a ride or even asking what I needed. He just refused, like my health wasn't important enough for him to spend his time on. So I had to drive myself, weak and nauseous, fresh out of surgery, trying not to vomit while I focused on the road. Even now, thinking about that makes my chest tighten, because it wasn't just dangerous, it was cruel. He watched me suffer, knew I wasn't well, and still chose not to help. And as if that wasn't enough, he found a way to make it even worse. That same day, he had a Zoom interview. Instead of making sure I was comfortable and safe while he prepared, he kicked me out of the house. He literally made me leave and sit in my car with a vomit bucket. Not because there was some real reason I couldn't be inside, not because the house was tiny, not because the interview needed absolute silence. He kicked me out because he said I would distract him and say something, as if I was some loud, unpredictable problem, not his partner who was lying in bed fighting nausea. I remember sitting there thinking, I just want to lie down. I just want to be in the bedroom. I just want to feel like I'm allowed to exist in my own home while I'm sick. But he treated me like an interruption. So there I was in the car, feeling awful, holding onto this bucket like it was my only option, trying to stay still, trying to breathe through waves of sickness, while he sat inside, preparing for an interview, acting like I was the problem. That moment said so much about him, not just that he lacked empathy, but that he didn't even see my pain as real. He saw it as something that inconvenienced him, something he could push aside, literally, by pushing me out. And the hardest part is that it wasn't one bad moment in an otherwise loving relationship. It was the pattern. It was always the pattern. 6 years of being dismissed, controlled, accused, and treated like I was lucky he tolerated me. 6 years of him making me feel like I was too much when I needed care, and not enough when I needed respect. 6 years of me bending myself into smaller and smaller shapes to keep him calm, to avoid fights, to keep the relationship from exploding. People sometimes ask why someone stays. They ask it like it's simple, like all you have to do is stand up and walk out. But when you're inside it, it doesn't feel that simple. You start doubting your own judgment. You start thinking maybe you're overreacting. You start believing the version of you he keeps describing, the one who is dramatic or crazy or unlovable. You also get tired. You get tired of fighting, tired of explaining, tired of trying to be understood by someone who benefits from misunderstanding you. And you hold on to the good moments, even if they're rare, like proof that it isn't all bad, like proof that you're not imagining things. I didn't leave for a long time, and I used to beat myself up for that. I used to think I wasn't smart enough, strong enough, brave enough. I used to wonder why I couldn't do what other people seemed to do so easily. But the truth is, the longer you're in something like that, the harder it is to see the door clearly. It's like living in fog. Your normal meter breaks. You get used to apologizing when you shouldn't, You get used to being blamed. You get used to being lonely even when you're technically not alone. And then, at the end, it wasn't some big dramatic breakup where I finally gathered my courage and walked away with a speech and a plan. It was uglier and more ridiculous than that, in a way that almost fits perfectly with the kind of person he was. After 6 years of him tearing me down and trying to convince me I had nowhere else to go, the trash basically took itself out. My jewelry went missing. It wasn't something small that you might misplace and later find in a drawer. It was missing in a way that felt suspicious, in a way that made my stomach drop, because when you live with someone who already treats you badly, you can't help but wonder what else they're capable of. Around that same time, he told me he was moving across the country to live in a homeless shelter. Even typing that out feels surreal, like something that shouldn't even be real life. He said it like it was some grand plan, some dramatic storyline he wanted to star in. I don't know if he expected me to beg him to stay, to panic, to try to save him. I don't know if it was a manipulation tactic or just another impulsive move meant to cause chaos. But what I do know is that after everything I'd been through with him, that announcement didn't make me feel heartbreak the way it might have at the beginning. It made me feel something closer to disbelief, exhaustion, and this strange, quiet relief. Because it was becoming clear that there was no stability with him, no safety, no real partnership, just constant emotional whiplash, constant accusations, constant selfishness, and then these dramatic declarations that were supposed to pull me back into orbit around him. 6 years is a long time to live like that. 6 years is a long time to be treated like your needs don't matter, like your feelings are suspicious, like your body being sick is inconvenient, like your happiness is optional. 6 years is long enough to forget what peace feels like, but it's also long enough to eventually reach a point where something inside you starts to wake up, even if it wakes up slowly. By the end, I wasn't even shocked anymore. I was just tired. Tired of being blamed for things I didn't do. Tired of being accused while I was running errands. Tired of being alone in moments when someone who loved me would have stayed. Tired of feeling like I had to earn basic kindness. And tired of living in a relationship where my reality was constantly questioned and rewritten. When he finally said he was leaving, it didn't feel like I was losing the love of my life. It felt like a storm moving out of town. It felt like the air might finally settle. It felt like I could breathe again. And even though a part of me still wondered, like I had been trained to wonder, if he was right about me being unlovable, there was another part of me that was starting to realize something important. The things he said weren't facts. They were tools. He said those things because they kept me scared. And when you're scared, you stay. But fear isn't love. Control isn't love. Accusations aren't love. Leaving someone sick and alone isn't love. Making you sit in a car with a vomit bucket so you don't distract him isn't love. And once I started naming it like that, plainly, without excuses, I could finally see what I had been living inside. I don't tell this story because I want pity. I tell it because I know how easy it is to lose yourself little by little and not realize it until you're almost gone. I tell it because I want that version of me, the one who kept trying, the one who kept hoping to be seen with compassion instead of judgment. And I tell it because the truth is, sometimes the person who hurts you the most is also the one who finally leaves. And in a strange way, that can be the beginning of your life coming back to you. It took far too long, and it was painful, and it changed me. But when he walked out, when the chaos started to move away from my daily life, I started to understand that he wasn't the best I could do. He was the worst I had survived. And surviving him didn't mean I was weak. It meant I had endured something that should never have been mine to carry in the first place. "7 years is a long stretch of time to live beside someone who drinks too much and turns into a different person, and I think that's why I kept doing it. I kept telling myself it was the addiction talking. I kept telling myself that if he could just get better, if he could just stop, the real version of him would come back. I blamed so many things on the alcohol because it felt easier than admitting the truth, which was that even when alcohol was part of the problem, it wasn't the whole problem. It wasn't just a substance making him act badly. It was also his choices, his selfishness, his coldness, and the way he treated my fear and pain like they were an inconvenience. It didn't all hit me at once. It sank in slowly, moment after moment, like water leaking into a room you keep pretending is still dry. I would have these flashes where I could see the relationship clearly, and then I'd talk myself out of it again, because accepting it meant accepting what I had actually been living with. But there were a few moments that cut through every excuse I ever made for him. Moments so sharp and so clear that I couldn't pretend anymore. They weren't dramatic, movie-style scenes with a big speech and a clean ending. They were real-life moments where I was scared, sick, and vulnerable, and he showed me exactly how little he cared. One morning I woke up and something was deeply wrong. It wasn't normal dizziness. It wasn't the kind of lightheaded feeling you get when you stand up too fast. It was severe vertigo, the kind that makes the world spin so hard you can't tell which way is up. I remember opening my eyes and immediately panicking because my vision wouldn't settle. I couldn't catch a focus point. It was like my eyes were searching for something stable and couldn't find it. Everything felt tilted and unreal. I tried to move and my body reacted like I was on a boat in a storm. I started throwing up, and then the anxiety hit because when your body stops making sense, your mind goes straight to the worst possible conclusion. I genuinely thought something catastrophic was happening. Brain damage, a seizure, a stroke, anything. I couldn't understand why it was so intense and why it wasn't stopping. Hours went by like that. Hours of vomiting, shaking, trying to breathe through panic, trying to convince myself I wasn't dying. At some point I realized I couldn't handle it alone anymore, and I called the paramedics because I was terrified. I didn't call because I wanted attention. I called because I thought I might be having a medical emergency, and I didn't trust my body to get me through it safely. Earlier in the day, I had told him something was wrong. I tried to communicate it the way you do when you're hoping your partner will step up. I said what was happening. I said I was scared and I expected at the very least concern. Maybe a call, maybe a plan, maybe him coming home. But the hours kept passing, and it became clear that I was facing this on my own. Eventually, when it had gotten so bad that I knew I was going to the hospital, I called him at work. I wanted him to know where I was going. I wanted him to show up. I wanted him to act like the person who was supposed to care about me. Instead, he told me he was going to work overtime. I still remember that moment because it made my brain stall out. It didn't even compute at first. I was literally telling him I was going to the hospital because I thought I might have had a seizure. And his response was basically, "Okay, I'm staying late." Not "Are you okay?" Not "Do you want me to meet you?" Not "I'm leaving now." Overtime. Like my fear and my health were less important than a few extra hours on the clock. So I went without him. I went with paramedics and doctors and bright lights and that awful feeling of being out of control inside your own body. I went in terrified and exhausted and still vomiting, and I tried to hold it together because that's what I had gotten used to doing. I had gotten used to surviving without support and then pretending it was normal. I sat there waiting, alone, trying not to fall apart, and he didn't show up, not for hours. When he finally did show up, it wasn't relief, it wasn't comfort. He didn't walk in like someone who had been worried sick. He acted like a total jerk to me the entire time, like I had inconvenienced him, like I had ruined his day. His tone, his attitude, the way he looked at me, it was all wrong. I remember feeling shocked because I was already scared and vulnerable. And instead of giving me something to hold on to, he added another layer of stress on top of everything I was already going through. And then, because life has a cruel sense of irony, the truth came out in a way that made me feel even sicker. He had a breathalyzer installed in his car. He got reports sent to the house every month. It was part of the reality we lived in, part of the way his drinking had already changed our lives, even when we weren't actively talking about it. And when those reports came, I learned something that made everything click into place with this heavy, sickening certainty. He didn't stay at work for overtime. He didn't have to. He wasn't trapped there by responsibility. He was trapped by his own choices. He didn't show up for me because he couldn't start his car. And he couldn't start his car because he decided to drink, knowing I was at home, sick and terrified, dealing with something serious enough to call paramedics. That's the part that still makes my stomach twist when I think about it. It wasn't just that he didn't help. It wasn't just that he wasn't there. It was that he made a decision to drink at a moment when he knew I needed him. And then, instead of admitting it, instead of saying I messed up, he let me sit in a hospital alone, thinking he was working, while he dealt with the consequences of his own drinking. And when he finally showed up, he acted like I was the problem. That was one of the moments where the excuses started to crack, because it showed me something I didn't want to see. Even if addiction was involved, there was still a part of him that chose himself over me. Again and again, even in emergencies. He didn't just fail me. He prioritized a drink over my safety, and then had the nerve to treat me like an annoyance. Months later, another moment came, and it hit even harder because it wasn't subtle. There was no room for interpretation. I had 4 impacted wisdom teeth. Anyone who has dealt with impacted wisdom teeth knows how brutal that pain can be. It isn't just a sore jaw. It radiates through your head, your neck, your ear. It's the kind of pain that makes you feel desperate. On top of that, I also had tonsillitis, and it was so severe my throat was closing. I could feel it. That tightness that makes swallowing hard and breathing scary. And as if that wasn't enough, I had a jaw infection, and it was awful. My body was fighting too many things at once. I was exhausted, feverish, swollen, and in real danger. This wasn't a take some Tylenol and sleep it off situation. This was the kind of situation where you know you need medical attention because your body is waving giant red flags. He drove me to the hospital, but even that came with an attitude. He was irritated that I wanted to go, like I was being dramatic, like I was choosing to be sick to make his night harder. I remember sitting in the car, trying to breathe through pain, while he acted like I was forcing him to do something unreasonable. It's such a weird feeling, being in that much physical pain and also feeling like you have to justify it, like you have to explain why you deserve to get help. When we got there, I told him I needed him to stay with me. I wasn't asking for anything extravagant. I wasn't asking him to take a week off work or throw a parade. I was asking him to sit with me in a hospital while I was scared and hurting. I wanted my partner beside me. I wanted to feel like someone had my back. That's such a normal thing to want. He freaked out. He didn't just say no. He exploded. He called me a fucking princess. Those were his words. And he threw in that he had to work the next day, as if that was the only thing that mattered. Then he told me I could stay at the hospital alone, like an adult. That line is burned into my memory because it was so cruel and so revealing. He used the word adult, like it meant suffer quietly and don't need anyone. Like needing support was childish, like asking for care was weakness. But real adulthood isn't about being alone all the time. Real adulthood is knowing when you need help and letting people show up for you. He didn't want to show up. He wanted to shame me until I stopped asking. I remember standing there and feeling this mix of pain and disbelief. My throat felt like it was closing. My jaw was swollen and infected. My mouth hurt so badly I could barely move it. And the person who was supposed to love me was yelling at me, insulting me, making me feel small for needing comfort. It was like my body was screaming for help, and he was screaming over it, making it about himself. 2 days later, I had emergency surgery. 2 days later, after all that, after the hospital visit, after the infection and swelling and the threat of my throat closing, I needed surgery. And he wouldn't even take me to it. He wouldn't take me. He didn't show up in the way that matters. He didn't do the basic thing a partner does when someone they love is going under anesthesia and waking up sore, vulnerable, and scared. And I remember one specific moment around that time, a moment so clear it feels like a snapshot. I was walking back to his car and I was in so much pain it felt like my whole face was throbbing. Every step hurt. My head was pounding. My mouth ached. My throat felt raw and tight. I was trying to move carefully, trying not to cry, trying to hold myself together the way I always did. And he was yelling at me, not comforting me, not helping me into the car gently, not acting like he cared that I was suffering. Yelling. I remember hearing his voice, feeling the sting of his words, and something inside me went very quiet. It was like my brain stopped scrambling for excuses. It stopped trying to translate his cruelty into something more acceptable. It stopped hoping he would suddenly become someone else. And I thought, very plainly, very calmly, like a sentence written on a wall, this person doesn't love me. Not he's struggling, not he's stressed, not he's sick and he'll get better, not it's the addiction, just the truth. This person does not love me, because love doesn't look like abandoning someone during a medical crisis and then lying about why. You weren't there. Love doesn't look like choosing alcohol when your partner is calling paramedics in fear. Love doesn't look like showing up hours late and treating them like they're annoying. Love doesn't look like calling someone a name when they're scared and sick. Love doesn't look like refusing to sit with them in a hospital because you'd rather be comfortable. Love doesn't look like letting them go through emergency surgery without support. I had spent years trying to make his behavior make sense. I had spent years blaming the bottle, blaming stress, blaming anything that would let me believe he was still the person I wanted him to be. But those moments stripped it all down to the simplest reality. When I was most vulnerable, when I needed care and protection and basic kindness, he didn't rise to the occasion. He didn't even try. He made it worse. He made me feel alone in a way that was deeper than being physically alone, because I was with someone, and still I had no one. It's hard to explain how painful it is to realize that. Not just that someone is flawed, not just that someone's struggles, but that their instinct in your suffering is irritation. That their instinct is to shame you. That their instinct is to leave. It changes something inside you. It makes you look back at everything and understand it differently. All the times you felt anxious, all the times you tiptoed around him, all the times you begged for basic care, suddenly they connect into one clear picture. That's when it really started to sink in for me, not as a theory, but as a lived truth. I wasn't loved in the way I kept hoping I was. I was being tolerated, managed, dismissed, and blamed, and I was expected to accept it because he had problems, because he drank, because he had excuses. But excuses don't hold your hand in a hospital. Excuses don't drive you safely when you're weak. Excuses don't sit beside you while you're scared. Excuses don't protect you. Excuses don't make you feel safe in your own life. And once I had that thought in his car, once I admitted to myself, this person doesn't love me, it was like a door opened in my mind that I couldn't close again. Because I could still feel sympathy for addiction, I could still understand how it destroys people, but I could no longer pretend that his cruelty was some accidental side effect. He was making choices. He was showing me who he was when it mattered most, and his version of love was something that left me alone, sick, scared, and ashamed for needing help. After that, the moments didn't feel isolated anymore. They felt like evidence. They felt like my body and my mind were finally agreeing with each other. I had been trying to force myself to believe in him, but reality kept showing up again and again until I couldn't ignore it. And even though it hurt to admit it, there was also something strangely steady about that truth. Because if he didn't love me, then I didn't have to keep earning love that wasn't coming. I didn't have to keep shrinking myself to fit into his comfort. I didn't have to keep excusing the inexcusable. I didn't have to keep confusing endurance with devotion. That sentence, as painful as it was, became a turning point. This person doesn't love me. And from there, it became impossible to unsee what I had been trying not to see for 7 years. That night started out like so many other nights with him. The kind where I tried to convince myself we could just get through it without drama. We had been at an event, and on the surface it was supposed to be normal. People laughing, talking, a little music, the usual end-of-the-night tiredness settling in. I remember feeling that familiar mental checklist running in the back of my head, the one I'd developed over years without even realizing it. Is he okay? Has he had too much? Is he in a good mood? Is he going to be mean later? Am I going to have to manage this? I hated that my brain worked like that, but it did, because living with him meant always scanning for what could go wrong. When it was time to leave, he acted like everything was fine. He gave me that smooth, casual confidence that used to fool me, like he was completely in control. He said he hadn't had much to drink. He said he was fine. He said we were good to go. And there was something in his tone that dared me to question him, like even asking would be an insult. In that moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to just get in the car, go home, and have a quiet night. I wanted normal. I wanted the version of life where you don't have to worry that the person driving you is lying. So I got into the passenger seat, buckled up, and tried to relax. At first, it didn't feel dramatic enough for me to panic. It was just little things, a little too fast pulling out, a little too sharp on the turns. The kind of driving that makes you sit up straighter without even meaning to. I started watching his hands on the wheel, the way he was holding it, the way he was moving. I watched the road ahead and then looked at him, and I felt something cold creep into my chest because the longer we drove, the more I could tell. He had drunk more than he admitted. It wasn't even just the speed. It was the slight delay in his reactions. The way he was pushing the car, like he was daring the road to challenge him. The way his mood felt too intense, like he was keyed up. I knew it. I knew it with the kind of certainty that comes from being with someone long, enough to recognize the signs, even when they swear everything is fine. I remember staring out at the dark road and thinking, please don't let this be one of those nights. Please don't let this be the night we don't make it home. Halfway through the drive, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. My fear was rising, and I felt trapped because I was. I was literally trapped in a moving car with someone whose judgment was compromised and whose ego was fragile. I asked him how much he'd actually had to drink. I didn't even do it in a screaming way. I didn't want to trigger him. I tried to keep my voice steady, but there was no hiding what I was feeling. I told him I knew he wasn't being honest. I told him I could tell. I called him out, and the moment I did, it was like a switch flipped. It wasn't the reaction of someone who felt guilty. It wasn't the reaction of someone who realized they'd made a mistake and needed to fix it. It was the reaction of someone who felt challenged, embarrassed, exposed. He didn't slow down and take it seriously. He didn't pull over. He didn't say, "You're right, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be driving." Instead, he turned it into punishment. He started driving like a maniac. He sped up, the car surging forward like a threat. He started taking curves too fast, the tires gripping hard, the car leaning, my stomach dropping with every bend in the road. He swerved, not in a momentary slip way, but in that reckless, deliberate way that made it feel like he wanted me to be scared, like he wanted to prove he was in control by showing how out of control he was willing to be. He was angry, and he was using the car as a weapon, not against an enemy on the road, but against me sitting right beside him. I remember shrinking into the passenger seat, my body going tight, my hands gripping whatever I could reach. I remember my heart pounding so hard it felt like my whole chest was vibrating. I remember going quiet, because I knew any words could make it worse. I remember thinking, don't cry, don't panic, don't give him a reaction. I remember staring at the road ahead, watching the lines blur, and feeling this horrible realization settle in. He's willing to risk our lives just to win this moment. That kind of fear is different from normal fear. It isn't, "I'm nervous," it's primal. It's your body telling you you might not survive the next few minutes. And there's a special kind of horror in knowing you're not in danger because of an accident or bad weather, but because the person who is supposed to protect you is choosing to endanger you. I wasn't just afraid of crashing. I was afraid of him, afraid of what he might do next, afraid of how far he would take it, afraid that we could kill ourselves or someone else, some innocent person who had nothing to do with our relationship and would never even know why their life ended. In that passenger seat, with him swerving and speeding, it became crystal clear to me that my safety was not important to him. My comfort wasn't important to him. My fear wasn't important to him. I was not a person to him in that moment. I was an audience. I was a target. I was something he could punish for daring to tell the truth. I knew then, in a way I couldn't unknow, that he did not give a single damn about me. Because even if he was angry, even if he felt called out, even if his pride was hurt, a man who loves you does not put your life at risk to prove a point. A man who loves you does not treat a moving car like it's part of an argument. A man who loves you does not respond to your fear by creating more fear on purpose. He might be defensive, he might be embarrassed, he might get quiet or even upset, but he doesn't try to terrify you with the power to kill you. When we finally made it home, I don't even remember feeling relief the way I should have. I felt numb, I felt shaky. I felt like something inside me had pulled back so far it might never return. I remember looking at him and seeing him differently, like a mask had slipped and I had seen what was underneath. It wasn't just addiction, it wasn't just a rough patch, it was a willingness to harm. It was a complete disregard for consequences. It was selfishness so deep that it didn't stop at emotional hurt, it didn't stop at insults, it didn't stop at manipulation. It reached into physical danger and still didn't hesitate. That was the moment my feelings shifted. Not because I suddenly became stronger overnight, not because I had some perfect plan, but because I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't tell myself that he cared and just had problems. I couldn't tell myself he loved me but was struggling. Love doesn't behave like that. Love doesn't gamble with your life. Later, when we were breaking up, I brought it up. I told him plainly that that night was when something changed in me. I told him it was when I realized I couldn't trust him with my safety. I told him it was when I felt my attraction and affection die, because nothing is more repulsive than someone treating your well-being like a joke. I told him how turned off I was by his disregard, how that moment made me see him as someone I couldn't build a life with, couldn't rely on, couldn't even relax around, and his response wasn't remorse. His response wasn't shock or denial. He didn't apologize. He didn't say he was ashamed. He didn't say he regretted it. He said, "Yeah, now you're getting it." That sentence landed like a punch, because it wasn't just confirmation that he understood what he did. It was confirmation that he meant it. It was confirmation that the cruelty wasn't accidental. It was confirmation that he saw the whole thing as a lesson he had been trying to teach me, like my fear and my pain and my survival were all part of some twisted message. It was like he was admitting that his goal all along had been control, and he was almost proud that I finally saw it. Now you're getting it. In that moment, Everything snapped into focus with a clarity that made my stomach turn. All the times I had made excuses, all the times I had blamed alcohol, all the times I had softened what he did in my mind so I could keep going. It all looked different, because that sentence told me he wasn't confused about his behavior. He wasn't lost. He wasn't unaware. He knew. He knew exactly how little he cared about my well-being, and he wanted me to know it too. There's a kind of grief that comes with that realization. Not just grief for the relationship, but grief for yourself. For the years you spent trying to make someone love you who was never interested in loving you the way you deserved. Grief for how much energy you wasted on survival. Grief for all the times you pushed down your own instincts because you wanted to believe in him. But there's also something else that comes with it, something steadier. Because once someone says something like that out loud, once they confirm the worst thing you've been afraid to admit, it becomes harder to lie to yourself. It becomes harder to romanticize the good moments. It becomes harder to pretend the danger wasn't real. It becomes harder to stay attached to someone who has basically told you, proudly, that your safety was never the point. That night in the car wasn't just terrifying. It was revealing. It showed me what he was capable of when his ego was challenged. It showed me how he responded to accountability. It showed me the difference between someone who makes mistakes and someone who uses harm as a tool. And when he said, "Yeah, now you're getting it," he sealed it. He took away the last little piece of doubt I might have had, the last excuse I could reached for. After that, the relationship wasn't a confusing gray area anymore. It was clear, it was sharp, it was simple in the worst way. A person who loves you does not drive like that with you in the car. A person who loves you does not risk other lives out of spite. A person who loves you does not hear you say, "That changed my feelings," and respond with smug satisfaction. And once I really understood that, I realized something else too. The night I thought he proved he didn't give a damn about me was also the night I started giving a damn about myself again. Because fear has a strange way of waking you up. It shows you what matters. It shows you what you've been accepting. It shows you what you can't keep calling normal. He wanted me to get it, and I did. But not in the way he meant. I got that I couldn't trust him. I got that I wasn't safe with him. I got that love isn't supposed to feel like sitting in a passenger seat praying you don't die. And once you get that, truly get it, you can't unlearn it. Back in 2019, my younger sister went through one of the darkest periods our family has ever faced. It wasn't the kind of sadness that comes and goes, or a rough week that improves with time. It was deep depression that seemed to swallow her whole, and as the months went on, it felt like we were watching someone we loved drift farther and farther away. I remember noticing little changes at first, the kind people sometimes try to brush off. She stopped doing the small things she used to enjoy. Her energy disappeared. She became quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy. Conversations that used to be easy started to feel strained, like she was speaking through a thick wall. Even when she was sitting right in front of me, it sometimes felt like she was somewhere far away. I kept telling myself it was a phase, that she was stressed, that she just needed rest and time, because it was terrifying to admit how serious it might be. But deep down, I knew. I could feel it. Something was really wrong, and no amount of pretending could make it less real. Then everything came to a head in a way I still have trouble thinking about without my stomach tightening. She attempted suicide, and suddenly we weren't dealing with a hard time anymore. We were dealing with the reality that we could have lost her. When I got the news, I remember feeling like the floor disappeared beneath me. It's hard to describe that kind of shock. Your mind tries to make it make sense, but it doesn't. It becomes this spinning loop of fear, grief, and disbelief all at once. I remember thinking about how close we came to a future where she wouldn't be here. I remember thinking about the kind of pain she must have been carrying to get to that point. And I remember thinking, over and over again, I have to be there, I have to help her. I have to do something, anything, because doing nothing felt impossible. She ended up being hospitalized for a week, and that week changed the way I saw everything. It wasn't only the fear of what had happened. It was also the helplessness of watching someone you love be in that much pain, and realizing you can't just love it away. You can't talk it away. You can't make it disappear by trying harder. The hospital part was surreal. There were rules, schedules, doors, waiting rooms, and this constant feeling of being on edge. Even when things were calm on the outside, I felt like I was vibrating inside. I tried to focus on what she needed, because that's what I do. I'm the oldest, and I've always been the one who steps in, the one who tries to hold things together. Without even thinking about it, I shifted into that role completely. I took time off work for a week so I could support her. I didn't debate it. I didn't weigh it like a normal decision. It felt automatic, like breathing. My job could wait. Everything could wait. My sister couldn't. I spent that week doing whatever I could. I showed up. I answered calls. I talked with doctors when I was allowed to. I sat in waiting rooms and tried not to fall apart. I tried to say the right things to her, but the truth is, there aren't perfect words in a situation like that. Sometimes all you can do is be there and let the person know they aren't alone. I tried to remind her gently that she was loved, that she mattered, that we wanted her here, that we were going to fight for her even if she couldn't fight for herself in that moment. I tried to be steady because I felt like she needed steady. At the same time, I was trying to handle my own emotions because I was terrified. I was exhausted. I was carrying this constant fear that something else could happen, that we could be one phone call away from disaster again. There were nights I barely slept because my mind wouldn't stop. I kept replaying everything, thinking about signs I might have missed, moments I might have misunderstood, things I wished I had said earlier. Guilt has a way of showing up in these situations. Even when you've done nothing wrong, it whispers you should have known. You should have prevented it. You should have fixed it. And even though logically I knew depression doesn't work like that, emotionally it was hard not to feel it. By the end of that week, I wasn't just stressed. I was worn down to my bones. I realized how much it had impacted my own mental health, even though I didn't want to admit it. I had to be strong all day, and then at night I would go home and feel like I was made of glass. I would cry in private. I would stare at the ceiling and try to calm my body down. I had anxiety in a way I hadn't experienced before, not just worry, but real physical anxiety that sat in my chest and made it hard to breathe. I felt like I was carrying a weight I couldn't put down. Even when my sister started to stabilize, I didn't instantly feel better. My body stayed in that high alert mode, like it didn't trust the world to be safe anymore. I learned that caregiving is not only about time and effort, it takes a piece of you. It changes you. And in some ways, it made me feel older overnight. Through all of this, I thought my partner at the time would be my support. I thought that was what a partner was supposed to be. Someone you could lean on when life gets painful. I wasn't expecting him to fix anything. I wasn't expecting perfect advice. I just wanted comfort, empathy, someone to say, "I'm here and I'm sorry you're going through this." I wanted him to understand that I was dealing with something traumatic and that I was doing the best I could. I wanted him to be gentle with me because I was already stretched thin. I wanted him to hold space for me the way I was trying to hold space for my sister. And in my head, that didn't feel like a big ask. It felt like the bare minimum. Instead, he made it worse. I still remember how blunt he was, like he didn't even pause to consider what his words would do to me. He told me I came from a family with depression, and he said it in a way that sounded judgmental, like it was a stain or a flaw. Then he added that I probably needed psychiatric treatment too. He didn't say it with care. He didn't say it like, "This is a lot, and you've been through something intense, and it might help to talk to someone." If he had said it like that, it would have been different, because there's nothing wrong with therapy or support when life gets hard. But that's not what he meant. He said it like a label, like an insult disguised as a diagnosis, like he was looking down on me and my family at the exact moment we were fighting to survive. It hit me like a slap. I remember feeling my face go hot, not only from hurt but from shock. I had been running on empty. I had been scared for my sister's life. I had been holding myself together with sheer willpower. And instead of comforting me, he reduced my pain into something cold and dismissive. It felt like he was telling me, in the simplest way possible, that my family's suffering was inconvenient to him. Like he didn't want to be close to anything messy or real or human. Like he wanted everything in life to be neat and easy. And if it wasn't, then it must be because we were defective. That moment made me feel incredibly alone. It's a strange kind of loneliness when you're physically with someone but emotionally abandoned. I didn't need him to be a therapist. I needed him to be kind. I needed him to understand that I was hurting, and that I didn't deserve to be judged while I was already trying to keep my head above water. His words didn't feel supportive. They felt like pressure, like one more thing stacked on top of everything I was already carrying. Suddenly, I wasn't only dealing with my sister's hospitalization and my own anxiety. I was also dealing with the sting of realizing that the person I loved could look at my pain and respond with cruelty and superiority instead of compassion. After he said it, I started noticing other things too. Sometimes one sharp moment opens your eyes to a pattern you've been ignoring. I began thinking back on how he handled stress in general, how he reacted whenever life got complicated, how quickly he turned discomfort into criticism. I realized that when he didn't understand something, he didn't ask questions. He judged. When he felt overwhelmed, he didn't lean in, he pushed away. And when I needed comfort, he offered analysis, but not the helpful kind, the kind that makes you feel smaller. It was as if he was more interested in being right or feeling above the situation than being there for me as a partner. What bothered me the most was that he didn't even seem to realize how inappropriate it was. He said it like it was a reasonable observation, like it was obvious. And that told me something important. It told me he wasn't seeing us as people in pain. He was seeing us as a problem he wanted to distance himself from. My sister's depression wasn't a crisis to him, it was an inconvenience. My emotional exhaustion wasn't something he wanted to soothe, it was something he wanted to label and toss aside. It made me feel like if anything truly hard ever happened again, I couldn't count on him. And once that kind of doubt enters your relationship, it doesn't leave easily. In the weeks that followed, I kept going through the motions. I went back to work. I kept supporting my sister however I could. I tried to rebuild a sense of normal, but I didn't feel normal. I felt like I was walking around with a bruise no one could see. I also found myself looking at him differently. I was still in the relationship, but something had shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like I woke up the next day and instantly stopped loving him. It was more like a quiet disappointment settled in, and it kept growing. I realized I didn't feel safe being vulnerable with him. I realized that if I shared fear or sadness, there was a chance he would respond in a way that made it worse. And that's a terrible feeling, because real intimacy requires safety. It requires knowing that when you open your heart, the other person won't punish you for it. I thought about how I had wanted him to show up for me in that one specific moment, and how instead he added more weight to my shoulders. It made me question what I was doing with him, not in an impulsive way, but in a serious way. Because I could handle a partner who didn't always say the perfect thing. I could handle someone who needed to learn how to be supportive. But what I couldn't handle was someone who used a crisis as an opportunity to judge me, to make me feel like my family's pain was something shameful, to imply that I was broken because I loved someone who was struggling. There was also something about the phrase, "a family with depression," that stayed with me. It sounded like he was turning our reality into a stereotype, as if mental illness was a family trait we should hide. But depression isn't a moral failure. It's not something that makes someone less worthy of love or respect. It's an illness, and it's complicated, and it can be deadly. The week my sister was hospitalized taught me how serious it is. It taught me how much compassion matters, and his response taught me that he didn't have that compassion, at least not when it mattered. I started imagining the future, and for the first time, it didn't look comforting. I pictured bigger life events, more stress, more responsibility. I pictured what it would be like to build a life with someone who couldn't handle hard emotions without turning them into criticism. I pictured a world where I might need support again, for my family or for myself, and he might respond the same way, with blunt judgment and a cold distance. And I knew I couldn't live like that. I couldn't be with someone who made the hardest moments of my life heavier. 3 months after that hospital week, I broke up with him. It wasn't because everything suddenly fell apart in one day. It was because the truth finally settled into my bones, the way truth does when you can't ignore it anymore. I realized that during one of the most painful, frightening periods of my life, he didn't comfort me. He didn't protect my heart. He didn't offer kindness. He added pressure. He made me feel worse, and I knew deep down that I deserved better than a partner who responded to crisis with judgment. Breaking up was still hard. Even when you know you're making the right choice, endings are painful. But it also felt like I was choosing myself. It felt like I was choosing peace over constant emotional strain. It felt like I was finally admitting that love isn't only about staying. It's also about being treated with care. If someone can't show you basic compassion when you're struggling, then they aren't truly on your team. And after everything I went through with my sister, after seeing how fragile life can be, I couldn't keep giving my time and my heart to someone who made me feel alone. Even now, when I look back, the part that hurts isn't just what happened with my sister, although that will always be painful. The part that stings in a different way is the realization that my partner chose that moment to be cold. In a time when I needed softness, he gave me sharp edges. In a time when I needed support, he gave me judgment. And that was the moment I understood something I wish I didn't have to learn the hard way. The right person doesn't make you feel ashamed for having a hard life. The right person doesn't treat your family's pain like a flaw. The right person doesn't add weight when you're already carrying more than you should have to. If anything good came out of it, it's that I learned to trust the voice inside me that says, "This isn't love." That voice got stronger after 2019. It got stronger because I saw what real crisis looks like, and I saw what real support should look like too. And I learned that even when life is messy, even when mental health is involved, compassion should never be optional. And if you or someone you love is ever in immediate danger or feeling like you might hurt yourself, it's important to reach out for urgent help right away. In the US or Canada, you can call or text 988. In the UK and ROI, Samaritans are available at 116 123. If you're elsewhere, I can help find the right local number. I was with him for what felt like half my adult life. I met him when I was still so young, only 17, and I stayed all the way through to my mid-30s, 17 to 34. When I say it out loud, it hits me how long that really is. It wasn't just a relationship that took up a few years. It was the relationship that shaped nearly everything about my adulthood. We built a whole life together on paper, the kind people look at from the outside and assume must mean stability. We had 3 kids. We had routines. We had the day-to-day grind of work, bills, early mornings, dinners, school runs, laundry, all of it. But inside that life, I was quietly shrinking for years, and I didn't realize how small I had made myself until I finally started imagining a future that didn't include him. When I think back, the biggest thing wasn't always a single dramatic event. It was the constant, repetitive disrespect that made me feel like I didn't matter. It was the everyday kind of cruelty that doesn't leave bruises, but leaves you doubting your worth. He had this habit that cut me down over and over. Whenever I spoke, he would just walk off, not in a playful way, not in a "I'm going to grab something and come back" way. He would literally turn and leave as if my words weren't even worth hearing. Sometimes I'd be in the middle of a sentence, and he'd act like nothing was happening, like I was just background noise in my own home. At first, I thought maybe he was distracted or stressed. I thought maybe he didn't realize he was doing it, but it happened too often to be accidental. It became a pattern, and patterns like that do something to you. They teach you that speaking up is pointless. They teach you to keep things in, to swallow your feelings, to stop expecting basic respect. It wasn't only when I tried to talk about serious things either. It was even when I tried to share normal, harmless parts of myself. If I talked about a show or a movie I was excited about, something I wanted to watch or something that made me happy, he would tear it down immediately. He'd say it was rubbish. He'd tell me I had terrible taste. He'd say he wouldn't watch it, and if I liked it, then it must be crap. It sounds petty when you say it quickly, like it's just a disagreement about entertainment. But it wasn't about the show. It was about what he was really doing, which was insulting me, over and over, in little ways that added up. I wasn't allowed to enjoy things without him making me feel stupid for enjoying them. I started to notice how careful I became. I'd hesitate before I told him about something I liked. I'd second-guess myself even in private. Like maybe I really did have bad taste, maybe I really was silly for being excited about something. It's weird how quickly confidence can disappear when someone keeps telling you that you're wrong, even about things that don't matter. And then it's not just movies. It becomes your opinions, your decisions, your instincts. You start making your world smaller and quieter because it's easier than being mocked. The unfairness showed up in practical ways too, in the little daily things that reveal how someone sees you. If he had an early shift and had to wake up at 3 in the morning, he didn't move around carefully. He didn't try to be considerate. He would sit on the bed as heavy as he possibly could, usually right on my legs, like he didn't care if it hurt or startled me awake. He'd leave the lights on. He'd move around like it was his house and everyone else just had to deal with it. He'd even give the dog a chew treat before he left, which meant the dog would start making noise and chewing and shifting around, making it even harder to go back to sleep. It was like he wanted to make sure I was disturbed, like he needed to remind me that his schedule mattered and mine didn't. But when it was my early shift, when I had to get up at 5, I did the opposite. I would quietly get ready in the bathroom. I wouldn't put lights on. I'd move carefully. I'd try not to disturb anyone, because that felt like the normal thing to do. That felt like basic respect. And for years, I did that without even thinking about it, because I was used to being the one who adjusted. I was used to being the one who took other people into account. I was used to being considerate while not receiving it back. That's how it was with work too. If I worked overtime, he dismissed it. He acted like it didn't count, like my effort wasn't real effort. He'd say he works 5 days a week anyway, and he does those hours all the time. So what I was doing wasn't a big deal. He had this way of making everything I did seem smaller than what he did. It didn't matter if I was exhausted. It didn't matter if I was balancing work and the kids in the house. In his mind, his workload was automatically more important, and mine was just something I should manage without complaint. Over time, that wears you down. You start to feel like you have to justify your tiredness, like you have to earn rest, like you aren't allowed to say you're struggling because he'll turn it into a competition you can't win. And after years of that, you stop talking about your day. You stop sharing your stress. You stop reaching for comfort because you already know it will be dismissed. I think that's why, when I look back, I don't just feel anger. I feel disappointment. Not only in him, but in myself, because I stayed so long. I stayed through so many moments where I should have listened to the quiet voice inside me that said this isn't right. I stayed even when my mom, before she passed, tried to warn me. She told me not to settle for the first man I met. She told me I deserved better, and I wish I had taken that more seriously. I wish I had trusted her wisdom instead of brushing it off like she didn't understand my life. Now that she's gone, that advice echoes louder. It hurts in a different way because it's too late to go back and redo those years. And it's too late to tell her she was right. The age difference is something I think about now too. When we met, I was 17 and he was 27. At the time, I didn't fully understand what that meant. I thought it made me feel grown up, like I was chosen, like I was special. People can make you feel like an older guy is mature and stable and knows what he wants. But at 35, looking back, it makes me cringe. Not because age gaps are automatically wrong in every situation, but because of what it meant in ours. I was still figuring out who I was. I was still a teenager. He already had a decade of adulthood behind him. And I can see now how that imbalance shaped everything. I can see how easy it was for him to set the tone, to decide what was normal, to dismiss my feelings, to make me feel like my opinions didn't carry weight. I didn't have the life experience to recognize certain red flags, and he took full advantage of that, whether he admitted it or not. We built a life and we brought 3 kids into it, and for a long time that was part of why I stayed. When you have children with someone, leaving feels bigger than leaving a relationship. It feels like tearing apart a whole structure you've been living inside for years. You think about stability. You think about money. You think about how it will affect them. You think about the logistics. You think about the guilt. You think about what people will say. And you also think about the little moments that look fine from the outside, like birthdays and school events and family photos. You convince yourself that if the worst thing is that he's dismissive, if the worst thing is that he's rude, maybe you can tolerate it. You tell yourself other people have it worse. You tell yourself you should be grateful for what you have. You tell yourself you're being too sensitive. But the truth is, living with constant disrespect is its own kind of suffering. It drains the joy out of your life. It turns your home into a place where you always feel on edge. It makes you feel lonely even when someone is right there. And after enough years, you start to realize that the biggest loss isn't just the fights or the insults. The biggest loss is the time, the years you spend not being happy, the years you spend waiting for someone to treat you kindly, the years you spend trying to prove you're worth basic respect. Only recently, at 35, something shifted in me. It wasn't one single explosion. It was more like I finally got tired of bargaining with my own life. I finally got tired of telling myself I could survive on scraps of affection and moments of peace. I finally looked ahead and asked myself a simple, honest question. Do I want this for the next part of my life? And my answer was no. I don't want to spend the rest of my years being ignored when I speak. I don't want to live with someone who walks away like I'm not even there. I don't want to share my home with someone who finds pleasure in belittling what I enjoy. I don't want to keep bending over backward to be considerate while being treated like my comfort doesn't matter. I don't want to keep defending my exhaustion like it's a weakness. I don't want to keep living in a relationship where I'm constantly dismissed and minimized. And maybe the hardest part to admit is that I feel like I wasted enough of my life already. That sentence is heavy because it's not just about him. It's about me, about my youth, about how much of myself I poured into a relationship that didn't give me back what I needed. It's about realizing that I spent years trying to make something work with someone who didn't even seem interested in being kind. It's about looking at pictures from my 20s and realizing how much I was holding in. It's about knowing I deserved better at 17, and I deserved better at 25, and I deserved better at 30, and I still deserve better now. But I'm trying to hold two truths at once, because both are real. One truth is that I regret not leaving sooner. The other truth is that I'm proud of myself for leaving now, because now is still time. 35 isn't the end. It's a beginning if I let it be. I'm not too old to choose peace. I'm not too old to rebuild. I'm not too old to learn what it feels like to be respected in my own life. And I'm not too old to show my kids what it looks like to refuse a relationship that makes you feel small. I think a lot of people imagine leaving as this dramatic, fearless act. But for me, it feels quieter than that. It feels like a decision I finally made in my bones. It feels like choosing myself after years of putting myself last. It feels like stepping out of a room that has been too cold for too long, and realizing I don't have to stay there just because I've been there before. I still have moments where I feel sad, and moments where I feel angry, and moments where I feel embarrassed that I stayed. I still think about my mom and wish I had listened sooner. I still have that cringe feeling when I remember how young I was when we started. But more than anything, I feel clear now. Clear that I don't want the next chapter of my life to look like the last one. Clear that I don't want to settle anymore. Clear that I don't want to keep spending my days waiting to be treated with basic human decency. I gave him so many years. I gave him half my adult life. I gave him a home and a family and 3 beautiful kids. I tried and I tried and I tried. But trying doesn't fix a relationship where one person refuses to respect the other. And I think that's what I finally accepted. I can't love someone into treating me well. I can't be quiet enough, patient enough, understanding enough to create a kindness he doesn't want to give. So now I'm choosing something different. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Because I've wasted enough time being unhappy with him, and I don't want to waste any more. Quick pause, then we're right back. A lot of people watch one story and leave, but some stick around. They hit subscribe and come back every night. If you want to be one of them, the button's right there. Turn on the bell too, so you never miss a new one. That's it. Let's get back to the story. "22 years is such a long time to share a life with someone. When you say you've been together since you were young enough that this August makes it 22 years, and you've been married since 2012, it tells me this wasn't a short chapter for you. This was the foundation of your adult life, the person you built routines with, memories with, and a family with. It makes complete sense that it feels heavy and confusing now, because when things start to get worse after so much history, it can mess with your head in a way that's hard to explain to people who haven't lived it. You don't just lose trust in him. You start losing trust in your own judgment. You start looking back at the years and wondering what was real and what was you trying to make the best of something that was slowly changing. And when you add children and immigration into the mix, the fear becomes bigger than the marriage itself, because it starts to feel like your entire future can be taken from you. For most of your relationship, you probably had a picture in your mind of what your marriage was supposed to be, or at least what you hoped it would stay. Even if it wasn't perfect, you likely believed there was a basic level of respect, a basic sense of safety. But you said the last 3 years have been getting worse and worse, and that's a very specific kind of dread. It's not one bad week. It's not a temporary stress period. It's a steady slide where things that used to feel manageable start turning darker. It starts with tone, with irritation, with those sharp little comments that sting but can be dismissed if you're trying to keep peace. Then it grows into name-calling, and it gets physical, and the anger becomes a normal part of the air in the home. You start bracing yourself without even realizing it. You start listening for footsteps. You start watching his face, his voice, his mood, the way he closes a door, the way he sets something down, because you're trying to predict the weather in your own house. That's not how anyone is supposed to live. It's also devastating when the person doing it isn't just some short-term boyfriend you can walk away from easily, but your husband, someone you've been with for more than 2 decades. When it's your husband saying cruel things to your face, it hits deeper. It's not only hurtful, it's disorienting because it makes you question who you married and what you've been holding on to. You said that in the last 6 months he has directly told you things like you're an idiot, that he regrets marrying you, that he thought you would get better and change with time. Those aren't arguments. Those are deliberate attacks meant to cut you down. They are the kind of words that stick in your mind at night when you're trying to sleep, the kind of words that echo in your head when you're doing normal things like washing dishes or folding laundry. Over time, it can start to feel like your mind is no longer your own because his insults take up space inside you. And the way he frames it is especially cruel because it isn't just "I'm angry," it's "you're a bad wife, you're embarrassing, I regret marrying you." That language is meant to create shame. It's meant to make you feel like the problem is your existence, your personality, your value as a person. It makes you feel like you're failing at something you've tried to do for years, being a good partner, building a stable family, making a life work. It's hard not to internalize that, especially when you've been together long enough that your identity is tied to the relationship. But the reality is, name-calling and putting you down isn't him giving you feedback, it's him trying to control the situation by making you smaller. Then there's the physical part, and I want to say this clearly. Getting physical is a serious escalation. It isn't normal couple conflict. It's not something you should have to tolerate, and it isn't something you deserve because you're stressed or you argued back or you weren't perfect. Once someone starts using physical force or intimidation, it changes the stakes. It means you have to think not only about emotional harm, but about safety. And what makes it even more frightening is that when someone is already comfortable calling you names and humiliating you, they can become comfortable crossing other lines too, because the pattern is that your well-being is not being treated as important. What you described about being stuck is the kind of trap that keeps people in harmful relationships longer than they ever thought they would. It's not just fear of him, it's fear of what happens if you leave. You move to his country, you don't speak the language. Your citizenship papers aren't in order yet. Your children are citizens there, which means their legal home is there, their rights are there, and your access to them can get complicated if you're forced out. You're afraid that if you try to move out, you could be deported before your paperwork is settled. You're afraid that if you're kicked out, you'll have no way to get back in and you'll be separated from your kids. That is not a small fear. That's a deep, primal fear, and it makes perfect sense that you feel trapped, because your mind is trying to protect what matters most, which is your children and your ability to be with them. When you say, "I'm so stupid and so screwed," I hear how panicked and overwhelmed you feel. But I need you to know that stupid is not the truth. People end up in these situations because they trusted someone they loved, because they tried to build a life, because they believed a marriage would be safe, because they didn't predict that the person they committed to would turn into someone who uses cruelty and fear. That's not stupidity. That's being human. Being trapped by immigration paperwork and language barriers also doesn't mean you made some unforgivable mistake. It means you're in a complicated legal and social situation while dealing with someone who is escalating. Anyone would feel scared in that position. The other thing that's important is that your situation is not hopeless, even if it feels that way right now. People in international marriages do have options, and there are often legal protections, social services, and safety pathways for spouses experiencing abuse, even when their residency status is tied to the marriage. I can't know the exact rules in your country without knowing where you are, but across many countries there are mechanisms that protect victims of domestic abuse from deportation, or allow alternative residency routes, or provide emergency housing and legal advocacy that can help you take steps without immediately triggering immigration consequences. Abusive partners often rely on you not knowing this. They rely on you being isolated, not speaking the language, and being afraid of authorities. They use that fear like a cage. A huge part of what makes this feel impossible is that you're carrying everything at once. The emotional pain of being insulted, the fear of physical aggression, the worry about your children, and the legal uncertainty. When all of that piles up, your brain goes into survival mode. That's when it starts using harsh words about you, like stupid, because it's looking for an explanation that feels simple. But the problem isn't that you're stupid. The problem is that you're dealing with a dangerous mix of abuse and dependency in a foreign system, and you're trying to protect your kids while you're exhausted. That is a lot. If you're in a place where you can do this safely, it can help to start thinking in terms of small steps that protect you, even if you can't leave immediately. I'm not asking you to do anything that could put you in danger, and you know your situation best. But generally, people in your situation often start by quietly gathering information and building a safety net without announcing it. That might look like keeping copies of important documents in a safe place he can't access, like passports, birth certificates, residency paperwork, marriage documents, and anything related to the children's citizenship. It might look like saving emergency numbers and addresses somewhere private. It might look like identifying one trusted person you can contact quickly if things escalate, even if it's not someone local. It might look like setting aside a small amount of money if you can. It might look like documenting incidents somewhere secure if that's safe for you, because in many places documentation can help legal or immigration pathways later. None of that requires you to make a dramatic move. It's just quietly giving your future self more options. Another thing that can matter in international situations is getting confidential advice from a domestic violence organization or legal aid group that has experience with immigrants and cross-border family situations. Many of these services can arrange interpreters, or they can connect you with advocates who speak your language. You don't have to already know the local language to get help, and you don't have to be certain you're leaving to speak to them. Talking to an advocate does not force you to take action. It often just gives you information and a plan so you can make decisions without panic. Also, if you ever feel in immediate danger, your safety matters more than paperwork. If he's getting physical or threatening, calling emergency services in your country can be life-saving. I know that can be scary when immigration status is involved, but many places treat domestic violence as an emergency and can connect you with services. Similarly, embassies or consulates sometimes have resources for citizens abroad in crisis, including lists of local shelters, lawyers, and translators. You don't need to handle this alone in silence. I also want to say something about how he's talking to you, because it's not just anger issues. When someone calls you an idiot, tells you they regret marrying you, tells you they expected you to change, and keeps repeating that you're a bad wife and embarrassing, that is emotional abuse. It's designed to break your confidence so you're less likely to leave, less likely to seek help, and more likely to accept whatever he decides. Add the physical component, and it's even more dangerous. None of this is your fault. Whatever flaws you have as a human being, whatever arguments you've had, none of it justifies being degraded or physically hurt. And despite how stuck you feel, the fact that you're saying out loud that it's getting worse is important. It means the part of you that knows this isn't okay is still alive and speaking. That voice matters. It's the voice that keeps you and your kids safer in the long run, because it refuses to normalize what's happening. You're not weak for feeling trapped. You're not stupid for being scared. You're responding to real risk. The goal isn't to shame yourself. The goal is to help yourself get back to a life where your home doesn't feel like a threat. If you're in the US or Canada, you can call or text 988 for immediate mental health crisis support. And in the US, you can also contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline. They can be reached by phone or chat. In the UK and ROI, Samaritans are available at 116-123 for emotional support, and there are also domestic abuse services that can help with safety planning. If you're not in those countries, you can still find local domestic violence resources through international directories, and your local emergency number will work if you're in immediate danger. If you ever feel like you might be harmed soon, or that he may escalate, please treat that as urgent and reach out for immediate help where you are. You're not totally screwed. You're in a hard and scary position, but there are paths forward, even if they start quietly. You've already done one of the hardest parts, which is admitting how bad it's become and saying you feel trapped instead of pretending it's fine. That honesty is not weakness. It's the beginning of protecting yourself and your children. We were together for about 3 years, and for most of that time I carried this quiet feeling that never fully went away. It wasn't a dramatic suspicion or some jealous paranoia. It was something much calmer and much heavier, like an instinct I kept trying to ignore. I felt like he thought he was better than me. Not in a small, occasional way, like someone having a bad day and being a bit snobby. I mean in the way he carried himself around me, like he was always slightly above, always the judge, always the one with the power to decide what was acceptable and what wasn't. I didn't want to believe it at first, because it's hard to accept that someone you love might look down on you. But after enough moments of him dismissing me, correcting me, or subtly making me feel small, I couldn't pretend the feeling wasn't there. One day I finally said it out loud. I told him I had the feeling he thought he was better than me. I expected him to deny it, even if only out of politeness. I expected him to say, "No, that's not true," or "You're misunderstanding me," or even, "I'm sorry I've made you feel that way." Something. Anything that showed he cared about how it sounded. But he didn't hesitate. He answered yes. That one word hit me harder than a long argument would have. It was so blunt, so simple, so confident, like he didn't even realize how cruel it was. Like it was normal for him to feel that way. Like it was obvious. I remember staring at him and feeling my stomach drop, because when someone admits something like that so easily, it means it's been living in them the whole time. It means the disrespect wasn't an accident. It was the foundation. I asked him why he felt that way. I asked him what had made him decide I didn't measure up. I wasn't begging. I wasn't even trying to fight at that point. I genuinely wanted to understand how a person could stay in a relationship while believing they were superior to their partner. His answer was even worse than the yes. He told me there was nothing I was doing in my life that deserved his respect. That sentence carried so much contempt, it almost didn't feel real. It wasn't criticism about a specific choice or concern for my future. It wasn't even a conversation about goals. It was a full dismissal of me as a person, like everything I was, everything I did, everything I cared about was worthless in his eyes. And what makes a statement like that so damaging isn't just the words. It's the way it reframes your entire existence as not enough. It makes you feel like you're standing in front of someone who has decided you're a disappointment, and no matter what you say, you're going to lose. I remember feeling a kind of clarity through the shock. The question came out of me naturally, like my mind was trying to protect itself. If that's how you feel, why are we even together? Because in a healthy relationship, if you don't respect someone, you don't stay. You don't build a life with them. You don't say you love them while also believing they're beneath you. So I asked, and his answer was the thing that finally snapped everything into focus. He said he thought he could change me and better me, not support me, not encourage me, not help me reach my goals, change me, better me, like I was a project, like I was something incomplete that needed to be corrected into a form he could be proud of. It was the kind of statement that reveals exactly how someone has been viewing you the whole time. He wasn't with me because he admired who I already was. He wasn't with me because he loved the real person in front of him. He was with me because he believed he could reshape me into someone that matched his standards. And until then, he felt entitled to judge me. And that's when it finally clicked. It wasn't one small moment. It was like years of little painful memories lined up in my head and suddenly made perfect sense. All the times he put me down, all the little jokes that didn't feel like jokes, all the subtle ways he made me feel like I was embarrassing, or silly or not impressive enough. The way he talked badly about me to his friends. The way he would never stand up for me. The way he seemed comfortable letting other people disrespect me, because deep down, he agreed with them. It all connected. It wasn't random. It wasn't miscommunication. It wasn't me being too sensitive. It was consistent with one belief. He didn't respect me, and he didn't even think I deserved respect. There's a particular kind of heartbreak that comes from realizing someone you love has been quietly looking down on you. It's not just sadness, it's humiliation. It makes you replay conversations and see them differently. It makes you remember times you tried to explain yourself, tried to earn kindness, tried to be good enough, and realize the game was rigged. Because if someone doesn't respect you, you can't love them into respecting you. You can't prove your worth to someone who has already decided you're beneath them. And once I understood that, there wasn't anything left to argue about. I broke up with him the very next day. I didn't do it in a slow, drawn-out way. I didn't start a long negotiation. I didn't try to convince him to see my value. I just knew. I knew I couldn't stay in a relationship where my partner openly admitted he thought he was better than me. I knew I couldn't keep giving my heart to someone who saw me as a fixer-upper. And I knew that if I stayed, I would slowly start believing his opinion of me, and I refused to let that happen. What's almost funny, in the darkest way, is how he reacted. He begged me not to leave. He pleaded. He tried to get me to stay. And the strangest part was that he genuinely didn't understand what he did wrong. That was the moment I realized something else about him. He had no idea what respect actually meant. In his mind, it was normal to feel superior to your partner. It was normal to talk down to them. It was normal to treat them like a project. And because that mindset was so normal to him, he couldn't grasp why his words were relationship ending. I remember looking at him and thinking, how can you say you love me and still not understand why this is cruel? How can you not see what you're doing? But he didn't. He thought the problem was that I was reacting too strongly. He thought I was being dramatic. He thought I should accept his help and be grateful that he wanted to make me better. He didn't understand that love without respect isn't love. It's control, it's ego, it's possession. Time passed, a lot of time passed, 10 years. And yet, in this strange twist that still doesn't make sense to me, he never fully let it go. He's married now. He has 2 kids. He has a whole separate life that should have moved forward long ago. But it still seems like he's hung up on me in a way that feels almost ridiculous, especially considering how much it seemed like he didn't even like me when we were together. We still have a mutual friend, and because people talk, his old friend group still remembers me. Recently, they were talking about me, and it bothered him and his wife so much that he asked our mutual friend to stop hanging out with me. That part actually says so much, even though it's annoying. It's been 10 years, and he still wants to control the narrative around me. He still wants to control who is allowed to be close to me. He still wants to pull strings from a distance, as if I'm not a separate person living my own life. It would be almost laughable if it didn't feel so petty and unfair. He's the one who looked down on me. He's the one who said I didn't deserve respect. He's the one who admitted he wanted to change me. And yet now, years later, the idea of other people mentioning me still gets under his skin so much that he tries to isolate me through mutual connections. It makes me want to say it out loud, the same way I think it in my head. It's been 10 years, Carol, let it go. But the truth is, as frustrating as it is, it also explains something important. People like him don't always miss you because they loved you. Sometimes they miss the control they had over you. Sometimes they miss the role you played in their ego story. Sometimes they miss the idea that they were the one who could improve you, like they were above you, and you were lucky they chose you. When you leave, especially suddenly and firmly, it cracks that story. It embarrasses them. It forces them to face the fact that you did not accept the place they assigned you. And for someone who thinks they are superior, that can feel like a personal insult, even if they were the one treating you badly. That's why it's so confusing from the outside. Because you're not sitting here longing for him. You're sitting here trying to understand why he seems affected when it was so clear he didn't respect the real you. You're not confused because you miss him. You're confused because the behavior doesn't match the logic. If he hated me, why does he still care? And I think the answer is in the last part of what you said. He hated the real you, not the version he wanted you to become. He didn't want an equal partner. He wanted someone he could shape, someone he could critique, someone he could feel superior to. That dynamic fed something in him. It made him feel powerful, smart, ahead. And when you ended it, you took that away. You refused to keep being the person absorbed his contempt. You refused to keep playing the role of not good enough. You walked out and proved that you didn't need his approval. For someone like him, that's hard to accept because it means his judgment wasn't absolute. It means you didn't agree with his assessment of you. It means his control had limits. And 10 years later, he's still trying in small, pathetic ways to regain a sense of power over the situation, even if it's only by controlling who talks to you or who spends time with you. The biggest thing I hope you hold on to, though, is what you did next. You left the next day. That takes strength. A lot of people stay and try to negotiate respect from someone who isn't capable of giving it. You didn't. You saw the truth, you trusted yourself, and you walked away before it could erode you further. That matters. That's the part of the story that is yours, not his. And if it still bothers you now, that doesn't mean you're not over him. It means you're human. It's unsettling to be treated like an object in someone else's story, especially by someone who didn't value you while you were there. But the fact that he's still weirdly reactive doesn't change what was true then. He didn't respect you. He wanted to change you. He thought he was better. And you chose yourself anyway. That's why it still annoys him. Because you didn't become the version of you he wanted. You stayed the real you, and you left. I'm going to tell this the way it sounds like it unfolded from your side, as someone who wasn't there for the relationship itself but has lived with the aftermath and the healing that came after. Because even without meeting him, you can still see the shape of what he did by the choices your wife had to make just to survive it. From everything you've heard, he wasn't simply someone who drank too much. He was an alcoholic from the time they were teenagers, back when they met in high school, and the drinking wasn't the only problem. It came with a nasty edge, the kind that turns a person mean, controlling, and unpredictable. The kind that makes the people around them learn to read moods and brace for impact. Your wife was young, still trying to figure out who she was, and she was tied to someone who wasn't safe. People sometimes imagine high school relationships as innocent or harmless, but for some people, those early years are where they learn what it feels like to be manipulated and scared, and that kind of experience can stick with you for a long time. From what you understand, things didn't end because there was a calm conversation and a mutual decision. It ended because it reached a point where her body and her future were suddenly on the line. She found out she was pregnant at around 3 months, which is late enough that it turns everything into a crisis, especially for someone who is young, overwhelmed, and in a relationship that is already unstable. That's the kind of news that should come with support, even if it's complicated. It should come with someone asking how she feels, what she needs, what her fears are. Instead, it sounds like he treated it like something he could command his way out of. He didn't ask, he demanded. He demanded she abort, like her body was a problem to be fixed, like her feelings were irrelevant, like her fear didn't matter. And when she couldn't do it, when it was too late for that option and she was faced with reality, he didn't soften. He escalated. He got physical. And the moment a man puts his hands on a woman because she won't do what he wants, the relationship is no longer a relationship. It becomes a threat. It becomes survival. That was her final straw, and it makes sense that it was. Because at that point, she wasn't just dealing with a selfish boyfriend. She was dealing with someone who felt entitled to control her choices and willing to use violence when he didn't get his way. There's no working through that. There's no waiting for him to mature. There's no hoping it gets better. When someone crosses into physical harm, they've shown you what they are capable of, and staying becomes dangerous. So she left. And then she was still left with this impossible situation in her hands. A pregnancy she hadn't planned, a body that had already been through stress and fear, and a future that suddenly looked like 1,000 doors closing at once. People can judge decisions like adoption from the outside because they get to imagine it as a neat choice on paper. But in real life, it's often made in a storm. It's made by someone who is trying to do the best they can with the resources they have at the time, while also trying to protect a child from being tied forever to a harmful, unstable person. Your wife made the decision to give her baby girl up for adoption, not because she didn't care, not because she was cold, but because she wasn't ready then, and because the man who was supposed to be part of that story had already proven he didn't deserve to be a father. He was already unsafe. He was already controlling. He was already violent. And the reality is, if she had tried to raise that child while still connected to him, she might have been signing herself and her baby up for years of fear, court battles, threats, and instability. Sometimes adoption is not a choice people make lightly, but one they make because they're trying to give the child a chance at a stable life when they can't provide it themselves, especially when the alternative involves staying tied to someone dangerous. That was 15 years ago. And it sounds like it's still a chapter that matters because it shaped her in ways people don't always see. Even when someone moves forward and builds a good life, those early decisions can leave a deep mark. There can be grief. There can be guilt, even if it wasn't deserved. There can be moments where old pain rises up for no obvious reason. But what stands out in what you shared is that she didn't stay stuck in that story. She didn't let that man define the rest of her life. She survived him, she got out, and she found a different future. Then you came into her life. You've been together for 10 years, married for 6, and now you have a little boy who's 2.5. That's not just a detail. That's the proof of how much her world changed. It's proof that the person she is now is not the person she was forced to be back then. It's proof that a woman can carry something painful in her past and still become an incredible mother when the time is right and when she has safety and support around her. You said she's an amazing mom, and I believe you. Because for a lot of women who went through something like that, motherhood later on isn't casual. It's intentional. It's precious. It's something they step into with a seriousness and a tenderness that comes from knowing what it costs to bring a child into the world. And you're right about something important. She wasn't ready 15 years ago. That doesn't mean she was wrong. That doesn't mean she failed. That means she made the best decision she could in a situation shaped by fear, limited choices, and a partner who was dangerous. And that man didn't deserve to be a father, not because he made mistakes, but because he responded to a pregnancy with demands and violence. That's not father material. That's someone who would have turned a child's life into a battleground. If anything, what your story shows is the difference safety makes. In a relationship with someone unstable and abusive, even the strongest person can be pushed into survival mode. In a relationship built on respect and steadiness, that same person can thrive. Your wife's life is proof of that. She is not defined by what happened to her in high school. She is not defined by what she had to do at 3 months pregnant. She is defined by the fact that she got out, she rebuilt, and she became the mother and partner she wanted to be, on her own terms, in a home where she and her child are safe. And honestly, your presence in that story matters too. Not because you saved her, but because you gave her a life where love didn't come with fear, where her voice counts, where she isn't punished for being human, where she can parent without walking on eggshells. That's a big deal, and it's the kind of quiet redemption people don't talk about enough. If you ever want, I can rewrite this again with even more detail and length, keeping it in one long, flowing story, but I kept it close to what you shared and focused on the emotional truth of it. My ex-husband and I officially divorced last week, but what keeps coming back to me isn't the paperwork or the court date or the final signature. It's the memories that were already burned into me years before the marriage ended on paper. This one happened about 3 years ago, and it was just one example of the seething hatred he seemed to carry for me like it was part of who he was. I can still feel how trapped I felt in that period of my life, how I kept hoping things would calm down, how I kept trying to make sense of behavior that never should have been mine to carry. Even now, with the divorce finalized, my brain still replays moments like this because they explain so much. They show how little safety I had, how quickly an ordinary day could become terrifying, and how he could flip from acting normal to acting like he wanted to destroy me. It was right before his nephew's wedding, the kind of family event that's supposed to be simple. You go, you smile, you support the couple, you make small talk, you eat, you clap, you take pictures. It's not supposed to be a battlefield. But with him, nothing ever stayed simple. There was always some tension just below the surface, like a storm waiting for a reason. That day, the argument started over something that should have been nothing. He wanted to tailgate in the parking lot with a cooler in his trunk before the wedding. He talked about it like it was a great plan, like it was some fun pregame thing. But it felt so strange to me. This wasn't a football game. This wasn't a casual hangout where people were sitting around drinking beers out of a cooler. It was his nephew's wedding. It felt disrespectful and embarrassing, like we were showing up already sloppy and loud to an event that was supposed to be about family vows and celebration. I told him I thought it was weird. I didn't even say it in a dramatic way, at least not the way he later acted like I did. I remember trying to keep it light, trying to suggest maybe we should just go inside like normal people, maybe grab a drink at the reception if that was what he wanted, maybe not make ourselves look like the couple who couldn't even wait to drink. In a healthy relationship, that kind of comment would lead to a small disagreement, maybe an eye roll, maybe a compromise. But with him, any disagreement, no matter how small, was treated like an attack. The moment I said it, his face changed. It was like I had pressed a button. He started yelling immediately, not asking questions, not trying to understand what I meant, just exploding. He screamed that I was accusing him of ruining his nephew's wedding. That phrase still sticks with me because it was so dramatic and so manipulative. I wasn't accusing him of ruining anything. I was reacting to his plan and saying it seemed strange. But he took my words and twisted them into something monstrous, like I was telling him he was a bad person and a failure and a disgrace to his family. He turned a simple opinion into a full-blown crime. Then he called me a fucking bitch. Loud, sharp, and full of disgust. That wasn't a slip. That was how he talked to me when he wanted to cut me down. It was the way he communicated power. And right after he said it, he went cold. He shut me out completely, like I didn't exist. He used silence as punishment, like I was a child he could discipline. We still had to go to the wedding, and suddenly I was going into this event with my husband acting like I was invisible, like I had done something unforgivable. The wedding itself was awful in a way that's hard to explain unless you've lived it. From the outside, I'm sure we looked like any other couple sitting there, but inside I felt isolated and exposed. I didn't know anyone there. It was his family, his people, his circles, and normally you'd at least have your partner beside you to lean on, to whisper to make eye contact with when you feel awkward. But he ignored me completely. Not quiet annoyance, not a bit of distance, but total shutdown. He wouldn't look at me, wouldn't speak to me, wouldn't acknowledge me, like my presence was annoying him. I remember sitting there, surrounded by strangers, feeling like I was taking up space I wasn't allowed to take up. I tried to behave like everything was fine because I didn't want to draw attention. I smiled at people when they looked my way. I nodded politely. I kept my posture calm, but inside I felt sick with anxiety. My mind kept spinning with that familiar fear. What happens after this? Because I knew him. I knew that when he shut down like that, it didn't mean it was over. It meant he was storing it up. It meant he was building a case in his mind. It meant he was deciding how to punish me later. I could feel the tension in his body, the way he sat stiff, the way he moved like he was holding anger in his muscles. He might not have been speaking to me, but the hostility was still loud. When the wedding ended and we got in the car, I felt a small, foolish kind of hope that maybe the worst was done. Maybe we'd just drive home in silence, maybe he'd cool off, maybe tomorrow would be normal. But the second the doors closed and we were away from other people's eyes, it escalated. He had been drinking. I could smell it on him, and I could hear it in the way his voice changed, in the way his reactions got sharper and less controlled. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was drunk and angry, which was a combination that made my stomach drop because I knew what it could turn into. On the drive home, it wasn't an argument anymore. It was abuse. Severe psychological abuse layered with physical intimidation, and it happened fast. He started calling me horrible names, not just one insult, but a stream of them, like he wanted to break me down word by word. He said he hated me. Not I'm upset, not I don't like what you said, but I hate you, like he was spitting it out, like he meant it from somewhere deep. He told me to kill myself. He told me to jump out of the car. He said it like he wanted me gone, like he wanted me erased, like my life was disposable to him. Hearing those words in a moving vehicle was its own kind of horror. I wasn't just hurt, I was scared. I was trapped beside someone who was angry, intoxicated, and cruel, and I couldn't just leave. The car doors were locked, the road was moving, and I was at the mercy of his choices. I remember my body going cold, like my system was trying to protect me by shutting down. I remember staring ahead and trying to keep my breathing steady, because when someone is like that, any reaction can make it worse. If you cry, they mock you. If you stay quiet, they accuse you. If you defend yourself, they escalate. You learn quickly that your safest option is to become as small and calm as possible, like you can disappear in the passenger seat. But he wasn't satisfied with words alone. At one point, he jerked the vehicle so violently that my head slammed into the window. The impact was sudden and shocking. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a small bump. It was aggressive, like he wanted to scare me, like he wanted me to feel how much control he had. The pain was immediate, and the fear that followed was worse than the pain. Because when someone is willing to physically endanger you in a car, even for a moment, it means you are not safe. It means your life can become collateral damage in their rage. I remember holding myself still after that, trying to stay steady, trying not to make him angrier, even though I was shaking inside. I remember thinking, please just get me home alive. Please don't crash. Please don't hurt someone else. Please don't kill us. And I hate that those were the thoughts I had to have in a marriage, after a family wedding, because my husband couldn't handle being told something was weird without turning into a monster. When we finally got home, I wasn't relieved in the way you'd think. I was numb, I was tense. I felt like I had been holding my breath for hours. My head hurt where it hit the window, but more than that, my spirit hurt, because something about that night made it feel undeniable. It wasn't just him having a bad day. It wasn't stress. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was hatred. It was contempt. It was cruelty that didn't even try to hide itself once we were out of public. And what breaks my heart when I look back is how familiar it all felt, even then. There was this part of me that was shocked, but there was another part of me that recognized the pattern, because it wasn't the first time he had punished me for speaking. It wasn't the first time he had twisted my words. It wasn't the first time he had used insults to control me. It was just one of the clearest examples, One of the nights where everything was so extreme that even my strongest excuses couldn't fully cover it. After that, it only got worse. That night wasn't the end of his behavior. It was more like a doorway into the next phase, where he felt even more entitled to treat me badly because he had already crossed lines and gotten away with it. That's one of the sick parts of abuse. Each time they escalate and nothing stops them, the line moves. What used to feel shocking starts to become expected. You start living in constant anticipation, wondering which version of them you're going to get. You start managing your words, your tone, your facial expressions, trying to avoid setting them off. You start walking on eggshells until you don't even realize you're doing it. I think about how he ignored me at the wedding while I sat there alone, and it makes me want to reach back in time and hold that version of me by the shoulders and tell her that none of it was her fault. Because the truth is, the cooler in the trunk argument was never really about the cooler. It was about control. It was about him needing to be right, needing to be the center, needing to feel powerful. It was about him turning any disagreement into proof that I was the enemy. It was about him needing an excuse to unleash whatever he was carrying inside. If it hadn't been the cooler, it would have been something else. A comment, a glance, a tone, a suggestion. When someone is determined to see you as the problem, they can use anything as ammunition. I also think about how he screamed that I was accusing him of ruining the wedding, because that's exactly how he operated. He would take something I said, make it bigger and uglier, and then punish me for the version he invented. It was like living in a world where my real words didn't matter, only his interpretation of them did. If he wanted to be angry, he would find a reason. If he wanted to hate me, he would build a story that justified it. Then he could act like the victim, like I had attacked him, like he was defending himself. That's how he could call me names and still sleep at night. He convinced himself it was deserved. When he told me to kill myself, told me to jump out of the car, I realized something important, even if I couldn't fully accept it yet at the time. Someone who loves you does not say that. Someone who loves you might be angry, might be hurt, might even say something mean in a moment of stress, but they do not repeatedly push you toward death. That isn't losing your temper. That's cruelty. That's a willingness to harm you at your core. And the fact that it happened while he was driving, while my safety literally depended on him, makes it even more terrifying. It was like he was reminding me that he held my life in his hands and didn't care. The divorce being finalized last week doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't erase the fear I felt in that car, or the humiliation of being ignored at the wedding, or the shock of my head hitting the window, or the way his words landed like poison. But it does matter. It matters because it means that chapter has a boundary now. It has an ending in the legal sense, but more importantly, it has an ending in the emotional sense, where I can finally say, I am not trapped in this anymore. I don't have to minimize it. I don't have to explain it away. I don't have to pretend it was normal. I can call it what it was. For a long time, I carried a lot of shame about not leaving sooner, about letting it get worse, about staying through things that should have been deal breakers. But the more distance I get, the more I understand that leaving is not simple when someone has been breaking you down for years. The abuse itself creates the trap. The fear, the confusion, the isolation, the way they convince you that you're the problem, the way they punish you for speaking up, all of it makes it harder to see the exit clearly. That's why moments like that wedding night stand out. They are bright, painful evidence that cuts through the fog. If I could sum up what that night taught me, it's this. His hatred was real, and it was never my job to earn my way out of it. I could have been perfect, and he still would have found a reason. I could have been quiet, and he still would have punished me. I could have been accommodating, and he still would have escalated, because it wasn't about my behavior. It was about his need to dominate, his willingness to dehumanize, and his comfort with cruelty. Now that the divorce is official, I'm trying to let my nervous system learn something new. I'm trying to let myself drive home from places without bracing for a blow-up. I'm trying to let myself attend events without worrying about being punished afterward. I'm trying to let myself speak without flinching. It's not instant. Healing doesn't happen just because a judge signs a paper. But I can feel that the worst part is over, because the person who harmed me no longer has legal access to my life as my husband. That matters. It's a line in the sand. And if there's one thing I want to hold on to from all of this, it's that I survived it. I got out, even if it took time, even if it got worse before it ended, even if I'm still sorting through the aftermath. I'm here. I'm safe from him in a way I wasn't that night. and I will not spend the rest of my life carrying his hatred like it belongs to me. If any part of you ever feels overwhelmed by what he said and did, or you feel unsafe, it can help to reach out to someone immediately for support in your area, a trusted person, local emergency services, or a domestic violence hotline, because you never deserve to go through any of this alone. I used to travel a lot for work, and for years it was just part of my normal life. Packing, airports, hotel rooms, coming home tired, trying to slide back into routine. It wasn't always fun, but it gave me space, and I didn't even realize how much that space mattered until it was taken away. When the COVID lockdowns happened and travel stopped, I was suddenly home all day, every day, with him. People talk about that time as if it was just boredom and baking bread, but for me it was something else entirely. It was like a curtain being pulled back. There's a big difference between coming home to someone after work and being trapped in the same space with them for months and having no escape. I don't even need to list everything that became obvious during that period, because just saying it was an eye-opener already explains it. It showed me what the relationship really felt like without distractions, without distance, without the relief of leaving the house and getting a break from his moods and his habits. So when the world started opening again and work travel came back, I remember my first trip clearly. It wasn't long, just 3 nights. In a healthy relationship, even a short trip like that creates this little thread between you. You check in, you send a message, you call before bed. You share small things like what you ate, what you saw, something funny that happened. Not because it's a rule, but because you actually miss each other. You want to stay connected. With him, it didn't happen like that. I barely heard from him. And if I'm honest, at first I didn't panic about it because this was who he was. He wasn't the type to send thoughtful messages or ask how my day went. He could be distant and self-absorbed even when I was right there. I think I noticed it more sharply because of the lockdowns. We had been spending so much time together that even his usual lack of effort stood out. Once I was gone, it was like the contrast made it undeniable. I was away and I wasn't missed in the way you want to be missed by your partner. There was no warmth, no curiosity, no sense that he cared about my experience or my safety, or even just the fact that I wasn't home. Still, I told myself not to make a big deal of it. I focused on my work, I got through the trip, and I came home thinking that maybe I'd feel that little shift people talk about, the relief of being back, the small, "I'm glad you're here" energy, even if he wasn't great at showing it. But when I walked back into my own house, it was like I had barely been gone. He didn't seem to notice. At least not in any meaningful way. There was no real greeting, no moment where his face softened, no "how was it?" no "I'm glad you're home." If anything, there was this faint resentment in the air, and I realized quickly what it was. I had interrupted his gaming schedule. I had returned and it wasn't like his wife was home. It was like a disturbance had arrived. I remember feeling this sharp, sinking disappointment because it wasn't dramatic. It was worse than dramatic. It was casual. It was him treating my presence like an inconvenience, like I was stepping back into a space he enjoyed more without me. Something in me needed to hear a different truth than the one I was living, so I asked him. I asked if he missed me. I didn't ask it in some needy, begging way. I asked it like a normal partner would ask after being away for 3 nights, after months of being trapped at home together. I asked because I wanted to know where I stood. I wanted to hear something human, something affectionate. Even a small answer could have softened the ache I was feeling. He looked at me and said he'd missed me making his meals. And for a second, I didn't even know what to do with that. It was such a blunt, ugly thing to say. It wasn't even "I missed the house being quiet," or "I missed having the bed to myself," which would still be cold but at least honest about loneliness. It was specifically about what I provided, about labor, about service, about the convenience of having someone cook. It reduced me to a function, like I was an appliance that had been temporarily removed and was now back in place. Of course, he tried to smooth it over right away. He tried to play it off like a joke, like he was being funny, like I was supposed to laugh. That's what people like that do. They throw the insult, then hide behind humor, so if you react, they can act like you're the problem for not getting it. But I didn't laugh, because something about that moment was too clear to ignore. I saw his eyes when he said it. I saw that flicker of truth behind the joke. I saw the satisfaction, or maybe the carelessness, the way he didn't even realize how much he was revealing, because to him, it was normal. To him, that was what I was. And I remember feeling this quiet shift inside me, the kind that happens when you stop making excuses. Because I could have done what I had done so many times before. I could have told myself, he's just awkward, he's just not good at expressing feelings, he's just tired, he's just joking. I could have swallowed it and moved on, but I couldn't unsee what I saw. I couldn't unhear what he chose to say when I gave him the perfect opening to say something kind. That's what hurt the most. I gave him a soft moment. I gave him a simple question that invited connection. He had an easy chance to say, yeah, I missed you, even if it wasn't his natural style. He could have said, it's good to have you back. He could have said, the house felt empty, anything. Instead, he went straight to meals, and in doing that, he told me exactly where I ranked in his life. I wasn't someone he longed for. I wasn't someone he looked forward to seeing. I wasn't someone whose presence made him feel calmer or happier. I was a background character who created comfort and convenience. And when I wasn't there, he didn't feel emotional absence. He felt logistical absence. He felt the lack of a service, the lack of a cooked meal, the lack of someone taking care of things so he could stay in his own world. Standing there, I realized that to him, I was tolerated as long as I didn't interfere with what he actually cared about. And what he actually cared about wasn't me. It was his routine, his screen, his time, his comfort. I was the interruption. I was the thing that made him pause a game, the thing that required him to look away from what he wanted, the thing that demanded a tiny bit of attention he didn't feel like giving. It's painful to see yourself that way through someone else's eyes. It makes you feel foolish for all the times you tried harder, all the times you cooked and cleaned and adjusted and convinced yourself you were building a life together. Because in that one moment, it felt like he wasn't even hiding it. He was telling me plainly that he didn't miss me as a person. He missed what I did for him. And the only reason he tried to make it a joke afterward was because part of him knew it sounded bad, and he didn't want to deal with the consequences of being honest. I think that's why that moment stuck with me. Not because it was the most violent or loud thing he ever did, but because it was pure truth. It was simple. It was revealing. It was the kind of truth you can't argue with. It answered a question I had been afraid to ask myself for a long time. What am I to him? And the answer, at least in that moment, was clear. I was the person who made his meals. I was the tolerated interruption. I was the convenience that came with companionship. And when the companionship required effort, I became an annoyance. That realization didn't happen all at once, but it started to settle into my bones after that. It made me look back on the lockdown period differently too. Because being home all day with him didn't just show me habits. It showed me priorities. It showed me what he did when he had endless time and access to me. It showed me what he chose to invest in and what he chose to ignore. And when I came back from that first trip and he barely looked up, it confirmed something I had already started to suspect. I was doing most of the emotional work in that marriage, and he was simply enjoying the benefits. The hardest part is that when you realize you're being used in small ways, you start seeing it everywhere. The jokes that aren't jokes. The comments that are meant to remind you of your place. The way he assumes things will be done without asking. The way he reacts with annoyance when you need anything. The way your presence is treated like a demand instead of a gift. It changes the way you hear everything. But as painful as it was, that moment also gave me something important. Clarity. Because once you see that someone values you mainly for what you provide, you start questioning why you're providing it. You start asking yourself what you're getting in return. You start noticing the imbalance. You start imagining what life would feel like if you weren't constantly trying to earn basic appreciation. And that's where the real shift begins. Not in one dramatic fight, but in the quiet moments where you finally stop laughing at something that hurts, where you finally trust your own eyes, where you finally admit, even if only to yourself, that you deserve to be missed for who you are, not for what you do, because you do deserve that. You deserve to come home and be greeted with warmth. You deserve to be asked how you are. You deserve to be wanted, not tolerated. And you deserve a partner who doesn't treat your love like a service they can joke about. When I look back on that relationship now, what surprises me most isn't that it ended. It's how many signs were right there in front of me, and how normal they felt at the time, because I was only 20 and still learning what love was supposed to look like. I didn't have the language for it then. I didn't know how to spot certain patterns as red flags instead of just how he is. I knew he was difficult. I knew he could be selfish. I knew he could be mean, but I didn't fully understand how calculated some of it was, how much of it was about control and status and keeping me small enough to fit into his life the way he wanted it. His family hated me for not being Jewish, and he didn't care. Not in the sense of, I love you anyway and I'll stand up for you, but in the way where he let it exist and made it my problem to endure. I was the one who had to absorb the tension, the looks, the judgment, the coldness, the feeling of never being fully welcome. If a partner is serious about you, they don't shrug off their family's prejudice like it's just background noise. They set boundaries. They protect you. They make it clear that you're not going to be treated like an outsider in their world. He didn't do that. He let their dislike hang in the air and expected me to live under it, like my discomfort was just the price of being with him. At the same time, my family hated him too, and honestly, they had good reasons. They saw what I didn't fully see yet, which was that he was controlling and full of himself. They didn't hate him because of his religion. They hated him because they could sense the way he tried to shape me, the way he talked, the way he carried himself like he was always right, like other people were beneath him. And instead of taking that as a sign to reflect, he leaned into the everyone is against us dynamic that controlling people love. Because when you can frame the world as hostile, it becomes easier to isolate your partner and make them depend on you. And that's exactly what he did. He actively isolated me from my friends. It wasn't always a direct command. It wasn't always you can't see them. It was the constant pressure, the complaints, the subtle guilt. The way he made it unpleasant enough that it felt easier to just stop trying. He made me choose between peace with him and connection with other people, knowing that if I chose peace, I'd end up alone. Isolation doesn't happen overnight. It happens in small cuts. A comment here, a fight there, a ruined night out, a sulky attitude when you get home, until you start shrinking your world without even realizing it. Looking back, I can see how threatened he was by me, especially by the parts of me that were bright and ambitious and actually going somewhere. He hated that I was more successful than him, and he hid my successes from his friends, as if my achievements were embarrassing to him instead of something to celebrate. That's such a specific kind of insecurity, the kind where someone wants a partner they can show off, but only in the way that makes them look good. He liked the idea of having me, but he didn't like what it meant when I outshined him. He didn't want to be next to someone impressive if it made him feel smaller. At the time, we were in the same academic world, but on very different paths. He was finishing his second year of law school, and I was graduating undergrad. I was valedictorian. I earned a Fulbright fellowship. Those are huge accomplishments. The kind people work toward for years. They aren't small. They aren't lucky little prizes. They're proof of discipline, talent, and effort. A loving partner would have been proud in a loud, joyful way. A loving partner would have wanted to tell people. A loving partner would have looked at me like I was incredible and said, "That's my person." Instead, he did the opposite. There's one moment that shows it perfectly. We were introduced to one of his professors. The professor recognized me because of all the campus news and excitement about what I'd achieved. And it should have been this easy little moment where my boyfriend smiled and said, "Yeah, she's amazing," or "We're really proud," or even just let the professor speak and share the joy. Instead, my boyfriend shrugged it off like it was nothing. "Oh yeah, that," he said, like it was a minor detail. Then he added something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it, because it was so revealing. I didn't know anyone had heard of it before. That sentence is packed with meaning. It wasn't just modesty. It was dismissal. It was him trying to make it smaller. Like my accomplishment wasn't real enough to be known. Like it didn't deserve attention. And then he changed the subject, because he couldn't stand being in a conversation where I was the impressive one. He couldn't stand the spotlight landing on me. He needed to redirect it back to something that didn't make him feel inferior. At 20, I didn't fully name it as what it was. I didn't think, oh, he's insecure and trying to control the narrative. I didn't think, oh, he's undermining me because he's threatened. I just felt a small sting. I felt the weirdness. I felt the awkwardness. I felt this little confusion. Like, why are you acting like that? But I didn't have the experience yet to realize that a partner's reaction to your joy tells you everything. People who love you celebrate you. People who want to control you minimize you. The truth is, he didn't choose me because he admired my mind or my drive. He admitted he dated me because he thought I was hot. That says so much about how he viewed women and how he viewed me. He wanted the version of me that looked good beside him. He wanted the version of me that boosted his ego. And then he realized I was a lot more than he bargained for. I wasn't just a pretty girlfriend. I was smart, I was ambitious, I had opinions, I had principles, I had a future. And instead of being excited about that, it threatened him. That's why it makes perfect sense that what finally pushed me over the edge wasn't only how difficult he was to deal with day to day, but something that exposed his values in a way I couldn't ignore. I dumped him because he was a difficult asshole, yes, but also because I was genuinely appalled that he didn't believe in providing free and reduced lunch for needy children. That seems like a small political belief to some people, but it isn't. It shows you how someone sees the world. It shows you whether they have compassion. It shows you whether they believe children should be punished for being poor. It shows you whether they can look at a hungry kid and still prioritize being right over being humane. When I realized he felt that way, something in me snapped into clarity because I couldn't pretend that was just a difference of opinion. It was a sign of who he was at his core. And honestly, I'm grateful that was the realization that was strong enough to cut through everything else. Because once you see someone's lack of empathy that clearly, it becomes harder to excuse their cruelty in your personal life. It becomes harder to tell yourself they're misunderstood. It becomes harder to keep trying. It becomes easier to trust your disgust, which is sometimes the most protective emotion we have. Now, with years of distance, I can see that it wasn't just me he had issues with. He seemed like he hated everyone, and especially women. Not in an obvious cartoon villain way, but in that deep, ingrained way where he thought women were supposed to exist in a certain role, and when they didn't, he punished them for it. He liked women as objects, as accessories, as people who were supposed to flatter him and center him. But he didn't like women as full human beings with their own power, their own success, their own agency. His family was dysfunctional too, and that environment shaped him. They were weird in ways that weren't charming, more like unsettling. And even though I loved his mother in some ways and could see how important she was to him, there was something toxic there. She could be hateful, the kind of person who makes her bitterness everyone else's problem. And his father fit that stereotypical older dad mold, emotionally limited, entitled, uninterested in examining himself. That kind of home can produce a certain type of man, especially if the emotional atmosphere teaches him that anger is normal, contempt is normal, and women are either to be worshipped as mothers or criticized as everything else. It doesn't excuse him, but it helps explain why misogyny can take its root so deeply. But the biggest thing I've learned is this: even if his family was dysfunctional, even if his upbringing was messy, even if his culture and environment shaped him, none of that made it okay for him to isolate me, belittle me, hide my success, or treat my achievements like an annoyance. None of that made it okay for him to let his family's prejudice hang over me. None of that made it okay for him to choose me for my looks and then resent me for being brilliant. I was 20. I didn't notice everything for what it was at the time, but I noticed enough. I noticed that being with him made me feel smaller. I noticed that I felt alone even when I wasn't alone. I noticed that he wasn't proud of me and that he didn't protect me. I noticed that his values were cold. And I did something that matters. I left. I didn't stay and let him reshape me into something easier for him to handle. I didn't stay and let him slowly teach me to dim myself. I got out before he could convince me that my success was something I had to hide to keep a man comfortable. I got out before his bitterness became my normal. And when I look back now, I don't just feel anger. I feel relief. Relief that I didn't waste more time trying to earn respect from someone who didn't believe I deserved it. Relief that I trusted the part of me that was appalled by his lack of empathy. Relief that I didn't settle into a life where my accomplishments were treated like inconveniences. He may have wanted the version of me that stayed quiet and grateful and easy to control, but that wasn't me, and it never was. So that's where we'll stop tonight. Before you go, remember this: every story you just heard was real. Real people, real nights, and none of them saw it coming. If that got to you the way it gets to most people, do one thing before you leave: hit subscribe. I post new stories all the time, and I don't want you to miss them. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time. We were traveling internationally together, and on paper it should have been one of those trips that brings you closer. New places, rented car, museums, sights you've never seen before, the kind of shared experience people look back on and smile about. But what I remember most isn't the scenery. It's how small and unsafe I felt in the moments when I needed basic care and he chose irritation instead. We were both jet-lagged at the start, which is normal when you're crossing time zones. The first couple of nights were rough for both of us, and I tried to push through like most people do. You tell yourself it's temporary, you keep your plans, you drink water, you walk around, you hope your body catches up. But after those first days, his body adjusted sooner than mine did. He started sleeping normally again, and I didn't. I was stuck in that awful limbo where you're exhausted, but your brain won't let you rest. Night after night, I could only sleep about 2 hours. 2 hours isn't a bad sleep. 2 hours is survival mode. It's just the kind of exhaustion where your eyes burn, your head feels heavy, your mood gets fragile, and your body starts begging you to stop. We had rented a car so we could see different sights, and that meant driving around while I was already running on fumes. I drove first, because that's what made sense at the time. We went to the places we planned, saw the museums, did the whole day like tourists do, and I kept going even though I felt like I was walking through fog. I didn't want to be the person who ruins the trip. I didn't want to complain too much. I didn't want to hear the sighs or the attitude. So I did what a lot of people do in relationships like that. I pushed myself past my limits to avoid conflict. By the time we were ready to head back, I could barely keep my eyes open. My exhaustion wasn't a preference or a mood. It was physical. It was dangerous. I asked him to take over driving because I was so tired. I wasn't asking for a favor. I was asking for safety. I was asking for the kind of teamwork that's supposed to be normal in a relationship. He agreed, but not with the kind of concern a caring partner would show. It was more like he was willing to do it, as long as I still did the work of supporting him. He wanted me to navigate. At first, that might sound reasonable. A lot of couples do that. One drives, one reads directions. But it wasn't reasonable in our situation because I was beyond exhausted. The minute I got into the passenger seat, my body did what it had been desperate to do for days. I fell asleep almost immediately because I had gotten no sleep the night before. It wasn't me being careless. It wasn't me being lazy. It was my nervous system finally grabbing any rest it could, like a drowning person grabbing air. And instead of seeing that and thinking, okay, she needs sleep, I'll just follow Google Maps myself, he got annoyed, not concerned, not sympathetic. Annoyed. I found that out in the worst way, because he didn't just complain when we got back. He didn't just make a passive-aggressive comment later. He punished me in real time. While I was just sleeping in the passenger seat, he would brake the car very hard, so hard that it jolted my body forward and made my face come frighteningly close to the dashboard. The first time it happened, I snapped awake in a panic, heart racing, adrenaline surging through me. It felt like that split second where you think you're about to get hurt. It wasn't just startling, it was scary. And then I realized it wasn't a one-time accident. It wasn't a random bad break, it was deliberate because it happened again and again. Each time I fell asleep, he would slam on the brakes hard enough to jolt me awake, like he was teaching me a lesson, like my need for sleep was an offense, like he wanted to remind me that I wasn't allowed to rest unless it was convenient for him. It was so petty and so cruel, and what made it worse was the setting. We were in a moving vehicle. I didn't have control. I couldn't just step away. I couldn't safely argue or demand he stop. I was trapped in the passenger seat with someone who was using the car itself as a tool to intimidate and punish me. It's hard to explain how humiliating and unsettling that is because it isn't just, he was annoyed. It's the message behind it. The message was, your safety doesn't matter as much as my irritation. The message was, I would rather scare you and risk you getting hurt than simply handle my own navigation like an adult. The message was, I need you to be useful to me, and if you aren't useful, I will make you pay for it. After the first couple of jolts, I remember trying to stay awake even though my body was screaming. I remember forcing my eyes open, staring at the phone, trying to focus on the map, trying to speak directions clearly, while my brain felt like it was barely functioning. I remember fighting sleep the same way you fight it in a lecture when you've been up all night, except this wasn't a lecture. This was my partner deciding that if I couldn't perform a task for him, he would physically startle me over and over until I did. And every time I drifted off again because 2 hours of sleep a night catches up with you no matter how hard you resist, the harsh braking came back. It wasn't just a jerk. It was enough to make me lurch forward, enough to make me fear I'd smash my face, enough to make me wake up in shock. The repeated nature of it is what makes it so chilling. He wasn't reacting to an emergency on the road. He was reacting to my exhaustion with punishment. That moment on the trip ended up changing how I saw everything. Because travel is stressful. People get tired. People get snappy. But there's a difference between being short-tempered and being dangerous. A decent person, even an irritated one, would have said, "Hey, can you stay awake and help me?" Or would have pulled over and switched seats. Or would have turned the phone volume up and followed the directions himself. There were so many normal solutions. Instead, he chose the one that put me at risk and made me afraid. And it wasn't just that he did it. It was that he did it because he was annoyed I wasn't awake to serve him. He couldn't handle the reality that I needed rest. He couldn't handle being responsible for himself for one drive. He couldn't handle even a small inconvenience without turning it into something sharp and controlling. When I look back, that's what stands out. The lack of empathy, the entitlement, the way he treated my basic human need like it was a personal offense, the way he used intimidation instead of communication. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice to prioritize his frustration over my safety while we were driving, which should have been the one place where safety is not negotiable. That trip was supposed to be about seeing the world. But in those moments, it showed me something else. It showed me what it felt like to be with someone who didn't care if I was exhausted, didn't care if I was scared, and didn't care that his actions could have physically hurt me. It showed me how quickly he turned from partner into someone who acted like I existed to support him, and if I couldn't, he would make me pay for it. And that's why it stayed with me. Not because I was jet-lagged, not because travel was hard, but because even in a foreign place, even far from home, even in a situation where a loving partner would protect you, he treated you like an inconvenience that needed to be corrected.